what's fasting all about? It's really the voluntary, it's not sort of forced, it's voluntary, not eating food for different lengths of time. And it's used primarily as a medical therapy for many conditions, also for a spiritual practice in many religions, and also as a political practice. So what about fasting? Well, it's been revitalized recently in the last few years, where a lot of people have been fasting and doing intermittent fasting, and it's kind of gained all this widespread acknowledgement in the Western scientific community. Fast forwarding about 2008, I kept on getting this eczema on my legs and this gastrointestinal distress stuff going on, right? So I went to get a food allergies test from this naturopath, and I found out, of course, I had sensitivities to a number of things: lactose, gluten, caffeine, dairy, all these different kinds of things. And once, so I started to change my diet. In about 2009, I really went on this real deep intermittent fasting sort of journey about 15 years ago. And most of my fasts back then were about 5 days, and I mostly just water, sometimes a little coffee or tea, but mostly just water. And after that, I did that from about from 2009 to about 2014. For about 5 years there, I was really more deeply getting into it, and the move to the next level, which was 7 to 10 days of fasting, just with just water. And my longest fast was a 15-day fast with just water. And I wanted to reach 41 days to beat Jesus by 1 day. Is my goal. And I knew I had it, but I just couldn't make the time to do it because I was teaching full time. But I was still exercising, interestingly enough, exercising while I was fasting. And I realized, when you start looking at the literature, that there's a lot of benefits in exercising in a fasted state. And I'll talk about some of those numbers and those kinds of things. Today, I fast anywhere from 18 to 20 hours a day. Yesterday was a day for about 42 hours. I was gonna do a 48-hour fast, but I figured I better, try to be conscious for this presentation. And then in about 2014 to 2018, I started doing all these different tests, metabolic tests, genetic tests. I started doing microbiome testing, and I started doing a lot of nutrigenomic testing, which is looking at your genes and how your genes respond to food. And then I realized that at that point, most of the nutritional advice I'd ever gotten, or most of the medical advice I'd ever gotten, was just based upon some kind of middle of the road information that really didn't consider evolutionary developments or blueprints or the genetics that we inherit, which are critical when we start thinking about how well we do with different kinds of food. So mostly I had to set nutrition aside and understand how my genetics were working. So I want to talk a bit about that today too as well. So in this particular chart here, if you can see it, the research has really looked at calorie restriction, alternate day fasting, and periodic fasting, and what do they do for our health, right? What kind of metabolic markers show up? And the most easiest approaches to stick with are the 12 to 24-hour intermittent fast, which has the highest compliance of folks. So when you look at, this is Mindy, I forget her last name, sorry, she's a doctor, I borrowed her slide there. Intermittent fasting is kind of the bottom of the pyramid, and then as you move up, you get a 24-hour fast. And I do a lot of 24-hour fasts, or like 1 meal a day fasts. And when you see the next level, which is the fasting mimicking diet, autophagy, which is auto meaning the body, phagy, which means the body's eating. It's not really eating itself, but what it's eating is these molecular junk. It's eating senescent cells that can turn into cancerous cells. As you go up to the 36, 42-hour fast, and you reach like the 3 to 5 day fast, it's kind of where your autophagy begins to kind of level off, and you're not cleaning out so much anymore. And the last one on the top, which I don't recommend, it I don't do, is a dry fast unless it's ceremonial, right? So the claim that I've written about and I've talked about after looking at a lot of research, I've really scoured the research on intermittent fasting, is that, this is part of an article that I wrote talking about, for millions of years, the eating patterns of our ancestors really evolved during times of feast and famine. Before the advent of agriculture, about 12,000 years ago, what our ancestors ate when they weren't eating were wild plants, fruits, grasses, seeds, nuts, fish, all these different things that were the nutritional pillars of human health and diet. And what was available, of course, is why they talk about eating seasonally now, dependent upon the time, the location, and of course the energy expended to go get the food, to hunt it. So what's pretty clear about the research and the literature is that, we weren't living off of big mammoth kills or buffalo or all those kinds of things. Meat was fairly a rare kind of thing for a lot of people, but we started eating meat at one point in time and eating fish. But we, found out, or we look at it now and see that in the historical times, people go without eating for different periods of time, different tribes, different places, especially in different parts of the world, sometimes for days, weeks, and sometimes even for months, where they eat like caloric restriction. So caloric restriction is really this whole idea about, if you're in a big group of tribal people and you want to prevent starvation, what you have to do is intentionally abstain from eating too much food. You have to ration what you have, to everyone. And now it's called, calorie restriction, but only eating when you're truly hungry. Now, if you're a faster and you're an intermittent faster or faster, you realize that there are a couple of periods that happen when you're not really hungry, but you think you're hungry. And by the time the third bell goes off for me at about 20 hours, I realize, I can go, for the next 5 days. So there's these bells that kind of signal to me that says, you should probably eat some food. If I ignore that, drink some more water, drink some green tea, I can get back past that really easily. Then my body goes into the next phase of restriction. So going without really played a really important part of our evolution, our lifestyle, health, and the culture of our ancestors. This is one of my grandfathers. His name is Bear's Teeth, and he was a holy man, Arikara holy man. He doesn't have anything to do with this quote here, but I thought it was cool to put his picture in there. So this is really about these Montane Indian hunter-gatherers in Canada in about 1636, and this Jesuit missionary, this Paul Lejeune, was spending some time among them, right? So he was watching them, trying to convert them to Christianity, and he was writing down his book. He was suffering from not eating, and they hadn't eaten just as long as him. They hadn't eaten for several days. So he's writing like, I saw them in their hardships and labors suffer with cheerfulness. Think about the last time you've gone 3 days without food and you're cheerful, right? I found myself with them threatened with great suffering. They said to me, we shall sometimes be 2, sometimes 3 days without eating for lack of food. Take courage, Chinini. Let thy soul to be strong to endure suffering. And here they're sort of trying to keep this white missionary up, right? And hardship. Keep thyself from being sick, otherwise thou wilt be sick. From being sad, otherwise thou wilt be sick. See how we do not cease to laugh, even though we have little food to eat. Well, it's really interesting when you look back at that time that these folks were able to laugh at that hunger, right? Count coup on that hunger, and continue to work at the same time. But that's the capacity we have as human beings. We've got the genetics for it. We've got the systems that sort of compensate for that. And we also have a gene called the 5-HTT-LPR gene, otherwise called the serotonin transporter gene, that actually codes for humor. If you like humor, you teasing, laughter, jokes, pranks, if your people had sacred clowns, it is generally a good chance you have this serotonin transporter gene. If you have that gene, you also will do well with collectivism. When you're by yourself and you're not laughing, you don't thrive. You begin to suffer. That particular gene helped us adapt to cellular challenges like hunger, so that when you laugh, the levels of endocannabinoids go up in your brain. Endocannabinoids are signaling opioids that go up that help you feel better. They suppress your pain, they improve your mood. Also, that goes up when you're fasting and you haven't eaten is what's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that's in the front part of the brain. It goes up. And as it goes up, the BDNF, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I study a lot of neuroscience. So how do I remember things like brain-derived neurotrophic factor? Well, I'm a runner. So every day I run, I know my BDNF is going up. And I used to think, well, okay, when I first started learning the term, BDNF to me stands for big darn native fella, right? So you got this big Indian guy in the brain, he's pouring the BDNF on my brain, and my neurons are replicating, right? There's a number of neurons that are being reproduced. They call it neurogenesis. And the ones that are there are being protected by the BDNF, so that we know that when you are in a state of calorie restriction or your state of fasting for a period of time, it's actually going to do a lot of good things for your brain, and it's also going to help prevent dementias and Alzheimer's disease. Which is, one of the reasons probably we see such a rise among Alzheimer's disease among indigenous people populations in North America. I just wrote a book chapter not long ago about healthy indigenous aging, and I looked at the rates that were going up. I mean, it's very surprising how quickly they're going up. And a lot of it has to do with a number of things that, I'm not going to talk about it in this talk, but things like movement, like dancing, like singing, like putting your body into a mild bioenergetic stress, where you sit in really cold water, or you take cold showers, or you sit in really hot saunas, or if you fast, or if you run 3 miles in a fasted state after fasting 18 or 20 hours, right? All those kinds of things are going to cause rises in your endocannabinoids. They're going to cause rises in your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and they're going to protect your brain, plus a lot of other parts of your body. So food insecurity is what they call it today, but back then, food insecurity had a lot of really powerful effects on our well-being. And colonizing the diet. When you look at this particular picture, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look at these numbers there, you see Black, and right next to Black populations, you see Native Americans, right, or American Indians, and you go down Asian. Look how low the Asians are, and then this is obesity, cross, and Samoans, and all these other groups here. So colonizing the diet was really about colonizing way back when. Not just about 120 years ago, but probably colonizing the diet, 1,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago, when we started to eat agricultural products instead of wild foods. But colonization of the hunter-gatherer diet and traditional diets, really really turned out to be very negative and very difficult, because today we live in an ad libitum situation. I went and got some coffee a little earlier, and I saw all the food that was still there that people had taken a few bites out, and they didn't finish the food. Now, that our ancestors would have killed for something like that, but that's what ad libitum eating is all about. It's the availability all time of food where you can eat all the time, right? And it's not a bad deal, because there are reasons why some people continue to eat like that, and I'll get to that when I start showing some genetic slides. But before the European agriculture, and even traditional agriculture of indigenous people, there was a lot of high fiber diets. 5 minutes, okay. All right. All right. Okay. All right, let's see. I'm not sure where to go with this. Oh, she just said 5 minutes. Keep going, okay. All right. It's a test. All right. So when you think about it, these high fiber foods such as wild plants, fruits, grasses, nuts, seeds, wild fish, and all these animals were the pillars of this indigenous diet, right? Undoubtedly producing this really high omega-3 profile, fatty acid profile, and of course, diversifying the microbiome, and also increasing that diversity, which made us, of course, healthier, or our ancestors healthier. The Western diet, of course, has produced things like, I'll kind of skip some of these things. We have all these mismatched diseases that exist today. Depression is a mismatched disease. It's a novel disease. And it's very high among indigenous people around the world in North America. Diabetes is a novel disease. It's something that happened, after the advent of agriculture and so on. So we've got all these different kinds of diseases. Alzheimer's disease is a mismatched disease, that we know that numbers of hunter-gatherer populations have the genetic markers for Alzheimer's disease, but don't get Alzheimer's disease because they still practice a traditional diet, wild food diet, and they move a lot. So what do we get from the Western diet? Of course, cardiovascular disease. You see all these things. Osteoporosis, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease. All these things that we know when we look at the research are very rare or absent in hunter-gatherer populations. We know the Chimene Indians of the Bolivian rainforest, who still live a very, very traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle, kind of combined with a traditionalist agriculture lifestyle, have a brain that experiences 70% less shrinkage than people in the Western world. 70% less shrinkage. That means that, you know, and they actually have markers of an APOE4, which is the one that everybody talks about, that you're going to get Alzheimer's, you're at high risk for that. They've got those markers, but they don't get Alzheimer's disease, right? They don't get Alzheimer's disease is because they're constantly under eating, is what we'd call it here. They're calorie restricting, and they're eating a lot of plant-based foods, a lot of high fiber. They're eating a lot of fish, and they're moving a lot. They're moving a lot. They sleep a lot better than we do. So hunter-gatherer diets sort of look like this, right? I mean, they get all these different things like fish and different wild plants and so on. And of course, you know, research is talking about if we return to those kinds of diets. I'm talking about the wild diet, so that I'm not talking about you're plowing up a field and you're putting down your heirloom seeds. I'm talking about preserving the wild forest, the wild grasses, the wild seeds, all the wild plants. That's the advantage. It's different. It's much different than a traditional diet, although a traditional diet is good, but the outcomes are much better when you're a hunter-gatherer eating the wild plants and so on. I'm going to pass by this one here. Talk a little bit about studies in intermittent fasting. So we know that all the studies in intermittent fasting now, this is Walter Longo's book, and he's the guy that made the fasting mimicking diet really popular, where you eat about 500 calories for about 5 days in a row. You do that every few months, and you get the same effect as if you're fasting 100%. So we know that a lot of these clinical trials have showed these really important biomarkers of wellness in terms of dropping down LDL, cholesterol, triglycerides, good fasting blood glucose, insulin levels, and C-reactive protein, and of course, tumor necrosis factor alpha, all these kinds of things, you know, that are cancer preventive or good for our health. Mark Mattson talked about, you know, intermittent fasting. He's done a lot of research on this. What does it do? Well, it improves glucose regulation, reduces abdominal fat, maintains your muscle, reduces blood pressure, you know, improves your heart rate variability, improves learning and memory and motor function because it protects the brain, as I said earlier. But look at this fifth bullet point: protection of neurons and of the brain against dysfunction and degeneration in animal models of Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and so on. We think about it. Right? So this is the prescription, right? It's not like, you know, we have to wait for Western science to come up with, you know, that single pill that's going to stop, you know, the amyloid proteins and the tau tangles in the brain. You know, food, movement, fasting, in this case, is going to do it, right? And the last thing he says, which I think is very important, is that intermittent fasting is beneficial for our health because it imposes a challenge to our cells. And our cells, you know, they get resilient, they're tough, they respond to that, and they can cope with stress. So those of you who have done a lot of fasting realize that that's what your cells are doing, that after a while, when you get the blood sugar rise, or your blood pressure goes up, or your cortisol levels go up because you're fasting, after you get used to that and you're doing it for a while, those things go up and they moderate very evenly. And that means your cells have adapted to that kind of, you know, going without. I'm going to go past some of these here. I'm going to get to my fasting and my genetics, right? So these are, people say, why do you fast? And I say, well, I think it's really important for my health. I really like the way it feels. I still run in fastest state. I lift all the time. I lift heavy things. I still do high intensity training. I'm 67 years old, and I still work out pretty hard. Nothing you know, special about me, except that I just followed a particular plan, right? Looked at my genetics. I do have a couple of elite genetics in there for athletic ability, which never took hold, but when I look at this, I got a JAK2, I call it JAK2 from my mother, and that puts me at risk for blood cancer. And, you know, when I first saw that, I said, oh man, shit, I got that, you know. But, you know, when I began to explore it, and I realized, I said, you know, we would never last, as anybody, as indigenous people, whatever, if we were passing down blood cancer genes and we were dying off, right? So as they say about genetics, genetics are the loaded gun. Your lifestyle pulls the trigger, right? So when I looked at this and I kind of panicked about it when I first saw that, I took this a few years ago, I realized that my lifestyle, my intermittent fasting, my running in a fasted state, and long-term fasting, but everyday fasting produces what they call autophagy, like I talked about, your body eating up those things that it doesn't need. In this case, when I fast, it cleans up these damaged abnormal stem cells. And intermittent fasting does that. So the research shows that, it has the clearance of that. So if you've got, if you have blood cancer or any of those kinds of cancers, leukemias in your family, or you're worried about that, which you should be because of all the pollution in industry, fasting is one of those things that helps clear those damaged stem cells. I also have the next one, APOE4 gene, which codes for heart disease and Alzheimer's. Right? I inherited that from my mother. My mother never got Alzheimer's. She lived to be age 94, but she may have other protective factors and genes that I don't have. So who knows? So I'm doing whatever I can. But the whole idea is that if you see this, what is the fasting protocol? Well, fasted exercise is one of the things that helps clear up some of these tau protein or tau and amyloid proteins and some of those kinds of things. It helps clear them out. When you do fasted exercise, you lower your triglycerides, your LDL, and you improve your sleep and you exercise. These are all the prescriptions that, that are very natural prescriptions. Again, things we should pay attention to. One thing I have to watch out for, and I imagine some of you too, is you may have this particular gene, the UCPI gene. I have 2 copies of it. You see that? The GG means 2 copies. It means high risk. That means I have a reduced resting metabolic rate, and I have an obesity risk. But it means that if you and I were sitting there talking, and we didn't move for like 4 hours, like Thosh was just doing a little while ago, we sit there, I would burn a lot less calories than you were just sitting. And there was a evolutionary advantage to that. I came from people that gained a lot of fat very quickly and held onto that fat, who made it through starvation periods way back in the day. And that was a good thing. I wouldn't be here today if they hadn't had that weight. Today, it's a mismatched disease, meaning that we bring that gene into this society where the next starvation isn't around the corner. So I'm not going to lose all that weight, right? I'm going to be eating food and gaining more weight till I get heart disease, till I have a stroke, or till I get Alzheimer's or something. So back in the day when my ancestors gained all that weight, and they gained 20, 30 pounds during the year, then they ended up with a famine that was all gone, and all the skinny Indians died off, right? All of us people that came from hefty people were alive, right? But it doesn't work that way now because, again, we don't experience a famine. But today, you would find out that if there was a famine, those of us that have the extra weight would survive and the others wouldn't. Okay, I got the Cry2 gene, which is also increased fasting glucose, which means that when I start to fast, my glucose levels go up, and when I have a high-fat diet, it also goes up, right? And it also decreases my respiratory quotient. Again, it reduces my respiratory rate of burning calories. So what's the solution? Again, fasting and a low-fat diet, right? People say, well, low-fat diets are bad. Not for people like me. Low-fat diets work. So when people say that, most of the time, or they talk about high-fat or low-fat, a lot of times they're reading general things and not looking at their own genetics, right? The next gene is DRD2, which is, again, TT. So that means high risk. That one is one I really have to watch out for, because when I eat, I don't get satisfied. I got to eat some more. I got to eat some more because I have a low dopamine response, right? If you're that kind of person that eats and you want to eat some more, and you want to eat some more, and you go back and sit down, you're full, but you still go eat a piece of cake after the feast, and you're still next morning, or you're still eating, you probably have the DRD2 gene. And if you've got 2, variants like that, of course, it's very difficult to lose weight. And you're very prone to overeating. You've got some leptin sort of dysregulation going on too as well. Leptin is the one that kind of helps say limit, right? Leptin is kind of the limit of food, and your body gets that signal. But also, you're less able to maintain weight loss. If you've ever tried weight loss programs and you gain it back, probably the reason is because of this lack of dopamine in the brain and lower food reward. Now, what cures it for me is intermittent fasting. It just clears it out right away. I'm better off not eating than I am eating because my body adapts to that better. And you have to do something to get your dopamine levels up, things that make you feel good, make you laugh, go for walks and swim and those kinds of things. And fasting does that too. It raises your dopamine levels, your reward chemical. ADRA B3, again, I got a CC, look at that. That means when it's a CC, it means I'm high risk, or TT. When it's mixed letters, then it's intermediate. So I have difficulty losing weight without exercise. The one thing I got in this gene was elite performance for men. And again, when you look at what's the solution for it, intermittent fasting, calorie restriction, eat a high complex carbohydrate diet, and lots of movement. I also have inherited from my mom shorter telomere lengths. Now, telomeres at the end of the chromosomes. I don't have pictures of those. So this is a very short, presentation. But if you look at your chromosomes like an X, at the end of your chromosomes, there's caps on them. They're called telomeres. The telomeres on the end of the caps are a sign of longevity. They're a sign of well-being. The shorter they get, the more susceptible you are to the diseases of aging and cancers and diabetes and those kinds of things. Women can inherit shorter telomeres, meaning they're biologically older if their mothers or grandmothers went through traumatic experiences. When you talk about historical trauma, it'll show up in the telomeres, and they can be passed down to children. Mothers who are overweight, mothers who have trauma will pass down telomeres to the baby, so the baby's born biologically older, meaning that you're going to get, you may get diseases of aging earlier. So what do you do with shorter telomeres? And there's ways to keeping your telomeres from getting shorter, but also ways of restoring them and lengthening them. Well, stress reduction. I do a lot of meditation. I'm an internationally certified trained mindfulness teacher. I've been doing mindfulness for like 46 years. And I do a lot of stress reduction with people. In terms of nutrition, it's no sugar, right? Sugar is like the bad stuff. You need to exercise, bone up on omega-3 fatty acids like fish oil, Mediterranean diet, HIIT, which is high intensity training, which I do quite frequently, and also mindfulness are things that bring down the stress and can keep your telomeres from shortening. So these are all high risk ones since they're TT. IRSI gene puts me at increased risk for type 2 diabetes. What puts me at risk for type 2 diabetes is meat and fatty meats. And so I work well on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And the next one is GIPR, which is this particular gene puts me at risk for obesity. Again, low fat, high carb diet, complex carbs. I've got a few more here. So AGT, it's not America's Got Talent, but it's AGT. So I don't know if anybody watches that. I watch that all the time. So I got 2 copies of that again, TT. Now I can taste the salt in the food. I can taste it because I don't eat salt. I was like, whoa, this is salty, right? But it's particularly important to me because I'm at increased risk for hypertension, and my genetics show it, right? I'm very salt sensitive. So these are like my hunter-gatherer genes. I realize I'm a true hunter-gatherer, man. I'm not an agricultural people, but although my people were agricultural people, I'm a true hunter-gatherer, right? And so my response to a low-sodium diet, again, is probably what indigenous people had, a long time ago, is very low sodium. The PLI, or Pliny, which is, again, a mixed one now. See, that's mixed, so it's A and G, so it's intermediate, meaning that, I have good weight loss and improved biomarkers with a high complex carbohydrate diet. And then finally, the last gene here is my hunter-gatherer phenotype. Anybody know if they're hunter-gatherers? Any hunter-gatherers out there? All your farmers, huh? Okay. There's a couple over there. If you test it, yeah. Does anybody know what their type is? Do you know if you are? No one knows. Okay. This one I did on a one called Gene Food. It's a provider, Gene Food, but this one I had, this one came from, anybody heard of Rhonda Patrick? Rhonda Patrick? No one heard of Rhonda Patrick? Okay, she's a biochemist and she does a lot of genetic testing, and it's for health, but she's got a really good website if you look her up. She takes good care of your data, her company, and they destroy it after so many weeks or whatever, and it's very cheap. It's almost like a public domain, I guess, genetic website. So my hunter-gatherer phenotype, maybe less tolerant to carbohydrates in the diet. Well, I'm slightly less to things like refined carbohydrates, which I don't eat. I looked at that fry bread out there and I, just about grabbed one, and Beverly stopped me. So Beverly Warren told me, don't take that, so that's mine. She said, no, I'm kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. So this gene, think about it, mismatch now, talking about nutrition. What was advantageous to our ancestors, right? This gene, this hunter-gatherer phenotype, was an advantage to my ancestors, because during these prehistoric times, my blood glucose levels, if I was way back then, would be maintained even when I was fasting, which meant that when they were maintained, I could still go out there and run down that deer. I'd have the energy to do it. Or I could go out there and I could fight the enemy, or I could go for a long walk or go hunting or whatever it was, right? And so, I'm truly a hunter-gatherer in that sense. It's also it's really a steady supply of fuel to the brain, right? Which contributed to the development of the brain. 5 minutes, okay. Now we're at 5 minutes, okay. Okay. Oh, geez, I got more here? No, I went backwards, I think. Okay. All right, some more, let's see, did I? Okay, no, I'm going the wrong way here. So this is from my 23andMe genetics test. So I'm about 27% risk of getting diabetes. It was about 33% about 2 years ago. Now it's 27%. It's dropped down. This is what I look like now when I'm on my intermittent fast or regularly. My blood sugar is at 73, 68, 76. That's what it is pretty much every day. This is a post that I wrote to Thosh Collins. I don't know if he's still in here, but he was talking about his blood sugar and a 2-hour blood glucose after eating response. And this is my meal of two Bob's red meal corn meal gorditas and some let's see, corn flour, salt, a little bit of salt, baking powder, avocado oil, and water, topped with cake. Topped the cakes with a bit of almond butter, wild choke cherry jelly. Alongside the cakes, I had a free-range egg and veggie scramble with the Brussels sprouts, green chili, onion, mushrooms, and Neiman Ranch uncured Canadian bacon. So I'm kind of giving myself away there because there's a lot of sodium I see already. Topped with a scramble of fresh-cut jalapeno and Fresno sriracha and so on, with a lot of probiotics in this meal. And that's my blood glucose reading after about 2.5, 3 hours or so. So I'm fairly stable with that, even though my blood can clear the sugar. Sorry, you can't see this too well, but these are another one of my testings here, that nutrigenomic testing. So it tells me that I should be eating like 10% sugars, organic fruits, berries, local honey, banana. I'm 65% fiber, fibrous foods in my glycemic. So the sugars I should be eating should be coming from yams, sweet potatoes, cassava root, avocado, kale, leafy greens, coconut, spinach, broccoli, all those different kinds of things. I eat all these foods all the time, sauerkraut and kimchi. My grains, I do get to eat some grains, but as you see, they're complex carbohydrate grains: rolled oats, buckwheat, quinoa, wild rice, brown rice. I eat some wild rice or white rice and some amaranth. Here's my protein breakout. Again, look at that. There's the meat is small portions, but it's mostly lentils and legumes and pumpkin seeds, hemp seeds, pinto beans, chickpeas. My normal breakfast in the morning is a bowl of oatmeal with pinto beans on the side, all homemade. And I used to have fruit in my oatmeal with soy milk. And I'll eat one piece of toast or two, but it's got to be sourdough. Gosh, I'm trying to remember what the grain was, but sourdough bread. Sourdough breaks down the gluten in the bread, so I can eat it actually. So 20% small portions of pasture-raised poultry, grass-fed beef, and wild game. I don't eat a lot of meat. I don't need a lot of meat, but I'll try to eat more salmon and sardines and so on. Dairy, again, I'm real, I'm pretty indigenous here. I don't eat any, dairy at all, unless I suppose I could nurse on a buffalo, but I don't know. Anyway. This is kind of the intermittent fasting and longevity. If you can see it, you'll see my IGF-1 score, insulin glucose-like factor, which is a predictor of longevity and disease. You see mine is, it's in range. The reference range here is 41 to 273. I'm 88. So my Z-score, but it's probably lower than that now. My diabetes risk, I don't know if I'm sorry if you can't see those numbers, but everything's normal. My glucose is a little high, even though it's between 70 and 105. But again, that's fasted glucose, meaning that my genetics are kind of kicking it up a little bit because I was in a fast then. My A1C, if you see that's 5.3, it's lower than that now. And then all the way down to lectin, adiponectin, all my numbers are good, right? HDL is a little low, but actually it's gone up. So my type 2 diabetes risk assessment low. But again, this is all from intermittent fasting and eating a more really very traditional diet. I don't think I have time to look at this one here. So I'll just end there and say thank you.